As the sun's luminous rays slowly descend upon the lush fields, rocky valleys, and coastal settlements of Crete, at the end of the Bronze Age, a new era is ushered in. The Minoans, whose enduring legacy still echoes through the annals of history, no longer held the reins of power. Instead, they were relegated to an inferior status and forced to swear allegiance to the Mycenaeans, who now governed their homeland. With the destruction of Knossos, the power of the Aegean was now centered at Mycenae. This shift in power marked the transition from the new palatial to the post-palatial period, the latter lasting from around 1400 to 1150 BC. As the old saying goes, nothing lasts forever, and like the Minoans had faced many times before, a downfall was on the horizon. But this time, there was no coming back. From this point forward, the mainland Greek city-states controlled the Aegean trade routes and would go on to form valuable relationships with the Egyptians, Syrians, Hittites, and Mitanni, among others. The Minoans, or more so, what was left of their once great population, were now forced to live under the cultural and political influence of a culture they had helped kickstart all those centuries ago. While the Minoans undoubtedly played a significant role in daily life on Crete and throughout the Aegean, they were now subject to Mycenaean authority. Knossos and Phaistos remained active centers of influence on the island. Western Crete saw a period of prosperity during this age, with several important settlements developing around Castelli and Hania. However, with the ever-increasing Mycenaean influence, Minoan culture was gradually replaced by that of the mainland. This is evident in religious beliefs, which began to exhibit strong influence from that of the Mycenaeans of the Peloponnese. When compared to the vast centralized kingdoms of the East, including the Babylonians, Elamites, Egyptians, and the Mitanni, the Mycenaeans remained a loose confederation of several large city-states centered at 4 or 5 major palaces. From time to time, fighting between the various factions broke out, ultimately weakening the overall strength of the Confederacy. Such squabbling likely played a role in their eventual demise, as, unlike the Minoans, they would not form a civilization that would last through several millennia. Despite their dominance over the Peloponnese, the Mycenaean kingdoms struggled to remain on good terms with one another, and a new threat arose to the east, one that would have long-lasting effects on their civilization. By the 13th century, localized rivalries led to several internal rebellions, and pirates from coastal settlements along the Mediterranean led to the fracturing of their power. Overwhelmed by the raiding, many of the palaces on Crete, such as Knossos, were destroyed once again. Those who survived the raids and destruction turned to the hills, where they constructed fortified hilltop settlements, showcasing the turbulent nature of the time. Around 1350 BC, the palace at Knossos was once again destroyed, and this time it was not rebuilt immediately. In recent years, archaeologists have noted that the building was ravaged by a fire, which triggered the collapse of the upper stories. It is not known whether this final destruction was intentional or the result of a natural disaster, such as an earthquake. One intriguing aspect of this period, often noted by historians, is the enigmatic arrival of the Sea Peoples. Many natives from the Aegean, including Minoans and Mycenaeans, as well as others from coastal Anatolia, joined the sea marauders that brought destruction to the banks of the Aegean. Together, they moved east, raising settlements throughout the known world. This confederation, known as the Sea People, eventually met their match in Egypt, where they were defeated in a great battle by the reverend Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III. Some of those captured during this time, known as the Peliset, were forced to emigrate to the Levant, forming a colony known as Philistia, and its people, the Philistines. Archaeologists and historians largely agree that the Peliset's origins can be traced back to the Aegean Sea. A prevailing theory is that their genetic ancestry is an amalgamation of several groups, including the Minoans and Mycenaeans of Crete. With the decline of the Mycenaean power throughout the Peloponnese, and even on Crete, This vacuum allowed for the emergence of a new people to take control, and emerging far to the north were the Dorians. The Dorians were a branch of Greek-speaking people whose traditional homelands are thought to have been somewhere around the mountainous regions of Macedonia and Epirus. By around 1150 BC, it was thought that the southern part of mainland Greece was entirely under their control. They established themselves in various regions of the Peloponnese, including Laconia, where the infamous city of Sparta would later emerge. Their influence during this period is felt across the entire heartland of Mycenaean culture, with the Dorian dialect of Greek becoming widespread. A strong communal bond and the separation of sexes characterized Doric social structure. Free men were heavily involved in the military campaigns, often spending a considerable amount of their younger lives away from home, fighting on behalf of the kingdom. Women, on the other hand, had a lot of freedom and considerable economic power compared to women from other Greek ethnicities. Unlike other Hellenic cultures, Dorian women were permitted to own property, manage their husbands' estates, and even delegate many domestic tasks to slaves. Dorian women also continued to don the traditional peplos, a tunic that was once common to all Hellenese. This form of clothing was pinned at the shoulders by stylish brooches and had several slits which bared the thighs, permitting a greater deal of movement than the chiton, a long tunic-like garment. By 1100 BC, the Dorians arrived on the banks of the island of Crete, taking over from the Mycenaeans and ushering in a new age of authoritarian rule for the last remaining native Minoans. This period marks the assimilation of the last remaining elements of native Minoan culture into the new Hellenic culture, a transition that was profound and far-reaching. Under Doric dominance, Crete transformed from a monarchy to an aristocracy, yet several aspects of Minoan traditions remained somewhat influential, such as their legal system. The Spartan legislator Lycurgos extensively studied the Cretan laws before creating his own legislation that would later govern the Lacedaemonian state. During the height of Doric Crete, Knossos, Arcades, Driros, Gortyn, Leto, and Lyctos became the most important centers of the island, and many continued to benefit from the trade networks first established by the Minoans as they exported and imported goods with Cyprus, Syria, and the Aegean. The rise of Dorian society not only marks a dramatic change in Peloponnese and Cretan politics, but also the transition from the end of the Bronze Age to the Dark Ages. While this sounds rather pessimistic, in reality, it's more accurate to suggest the Dorians simply brought a period of instability to the region, rather than being the driving force behind the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. The reality is that the latter had already been in decline, but it wasn't all negative. As the first millennium BC rolled in, Doric culture brought various contributions that would survive through to the much later classical Greek world. Strong, unadorned columns, evident in sites such as the Parthenon, the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, and the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, characterize Doric architecture. The Doric dialect also influenced the development of language in many of the regions in which they settled. New technologies also emerged during the height of Doric society, such as the arrival of ironworking and the adoption of the Phoenician alphabet that would later form the basis of the Greek script. The awe-inspiring epics of Homer, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, are also believed to have been composed during the Dark Ages, reflecting the values and traditions of this period. However, their invasion of the mainland and Crete ultimately led to a period of decline in trade, population, and increased isolation between groups. The large centralized Mycenaean city-states gave way to smaller, independent communities, or polis, often ruled by chieftains or heads of families. In time, the once prosperous cultures that had laid the foundations of civilization throughout the Aegean Sea had morphed into nothing more than fairy tales and legends. The Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, which had previously ushered in an age of social evolution, were no more. However, the amalgamation of the Doric society with that of its predecessors would eventually lead to the emergence of classical Greek civilization, a culture that would go on to help shape the modern world.